So we all want to win our 2021 fantasy football leagues, but in order to do so, we have to virtually make every correct decision throughout the start of the league year, throughout the duration of the regular season, and leading up to that ultimate championship performance where we're looking to take home that first place prize. Today I'll be walking you through the best strategies for the most important singular day across all fantasy football leagues, platforms, and formats. That, of course, being draft day. I've got my favorite strategies and tactics to attack every cluster of draft positions here on the big board for 12-team leagues. So let's hit the intro, sit back, relax, and let's dive right in to today's video. Here we go. So some important details I want to touch on very quickly here before I dive into the details is this video, again, is designed for 12-team formats. And this right here, you can see I have a screenshot of the first 6 rounds of a mock draft on the Sleeper Fantasy app. This, of course, if you've been around here on the channel, you're very familiar with it. It's my favorite mock draft tool for off seasons, regular seasons, whatever you're doing mock drafts for. Sleeper Fantasy is the place to be for that. And this mock draft, I didn't actually make any picks here. I turned on the auto draft position and I let the board play out the way it wanted to play out here. So I'm simply here to analyze this board for you, to tell you and break this thing down for how to best attack every single one of these positions. Like I said in the start of the video, I've got some clusters here that I've broken the board up into to make these decisions. So if you're not in a 12-team league here, that's completely okay. I think there's something you can still take away from this. And at the very least, you can kind of do some translations here and figure out where some of these players should be going and why I think they should be going there, and then converting that to however many players you have in your leagues. Ideally, I think that 12 teams is where we want to be at. I think that's the best way to play fantasy football. You've got a really nice spread of talent across different rosters and whatever, and the formats don't necessarily matter here. Something to note as well here, I'm using half PPR ADP. The reason I did this and the reason that that's kind of a staple here on the channel is I like the balance we've got. So no matter what type of perspective you're looking at this from, whether your league plays a standard league where you don't get any bonus for catching passes, or you do get a whole extra point for every pass caught by a player, half PPR meets in the middle, and regardless of where you stand, I'm only half a point away from you, whichever way you swing on that pendulum. So a lot of balance here. That's what we like to do. Keep things as universally understandable and digestible for all parties tuning in today. So that is what we are aiming for here. So as you can see, my logo is there, or I guess that's not my logo, but my sleeper icon. I technically owned the first overall draft spot in this mock. Again, I didn't actually make any picks here. This is just to illustrate kind of how the board's falling right now. This video is being recorded in mid-June right now, so things are going to change. Maybe I make this video again sometime at a later date this offseason. But this is how things are playing out right now in the way that fantasy leagues are being set up based off of how the fantasy community is mock drafting right now. So here's the big board. In a second, this is going to disappear, and it's going to be sectioned off to only the 3 teams or 4 teams in some situations that I'm talking about in each cluster. So you can see the board. You can see all the picks. Pause the video if you want to take a deeper look at this and see exactly what's happening here. But we're going to jump into my first strategy for the draft positions 1 through 3. And I actually left 4 up on the screen here because I'm going to talk about them in just a second. But 1 through 3 is the main grouping of picks that we're taking a look at for this first strategy here. And this is something I like to call running back overload. At the top of draft boards, regardless of what league format and setting you're playing in, again, half PPR draft here or half PPR ADP is what's being reflected on the board. It's very close, most likely, to whatever form of fantasy league you're playing in. This is the most valuable position, I think, to be in the draft boards, and actually stats show us the teams that pick in the top of their draft boards, particularly that number 1 overall draft spot, are the most likely to go all the way, go the distance, and win those fantasy leagues. Because obviously you're getting your pick of the entire player pool who you want at that first overall spot. So this mock draft took Christian McCaffrey as the 1.1 draft spot. If you've been here, you know I like Dalvin Cook a little bit more. That's besides the point here. Regardless, you're getting a top end running back, which is going to be the pick across all fantasy formats. It doesn't really matter. Running backs are the way to go at the top of the draft board. In this position here, We're going to be mostly talking about the early rounds of this draft board because I think they're the easiest to predict. Once we get down in the back half of that draft, it gets really tough to predict and analyze how things are going to go because it comes down to player preference at that point. Certain players are going to wildly outvalue certain players as opposed to others, and it's a lot more difficult to break down the decisions that are being made at that spot in the draft. The top 3 rounds in particular, these are the easiest to get a feel for. This is the most commonly consistent range on the draft board, I would say, between fantasy players. So that's what we're focusing on today, getting these 3 rounds right so that you can at least be set up for success down the road in your leagues this year. Running back overload. Bing, bang, boom, bop. We've got McCaffrey, Cook, Henry, Barkley. 4 straight running backs off the board here. If you remember back to the first slide, you'll see that again later. You'll see that in the next cluster, what starts to happen after this. But running back heavy is the way that boards are falling. It's been the trend for years now. It's basically a staple in fantasy football. You snatch up those top-end running backs when you have the chance. Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, the only name that I see missing on here that could probably be tossed into this category that isn't on this particular mock draft is you could value Alvin Kamara higher than a Derrick Henry or a Saquon Barkley depending on your own personal rankings. Again, if you tune in throughout my videos, you'll know what my rankings are. You'll know how I value these players. Ultimately, what I'm here to do is set you up for fantasy football success and to give you my insight and input so that you can ultimately make that decision for yourself. Not everyone's going to agree with my rankings. Not everyone is going to live or die by the numbers that I have posted on sizzlefantasy.com and that I have for my own personal rankings. Use my stuff as a tool, as a resource to help you gauge your perspective on fantasy and how you like players opposed to other guys. So a lot of unique stuff that you can take away from this video, a lot of interesting angles you can approach this from. But the main point for these 3 picks is in rounds 1 through 3, running back overload. Load up on as many top-end running backs as you can get your hands on because you are setting yourself at such a positional advantage by doing this at this particular draft spot. It will pay off major dividends on the back end. Running back overload is a strategy that I was actually quite skeptical on last season. I didn't love it so much because I felt like it was limiting my upside in league drafts when I was approaching these boards. But I think that I had to put some more context behind that. What I realized is that once you get one of those top 4 or 5 guys that are that tier 1, that tier 1A and tier 1B of elite running backs that are miles above the competition, because that's what we see at the running back spot right now. It's the 1A and 1B players and then the rest of the guys. And that's really rung true here. There's a lot of committees these days. There's not too many workhorse running backs in the National Football League anymore. It's harder to come by these players that are every down workhorse players that give us those solid numbers every single week. That's what you're getting when you're at the top of the draft board. You have first pick at these players. You need to take them. I love Devontae Adams. I love Tyreek Hill. They can wait until the middle. They're not going to ultimately give you the value that these running backs are giving you at that spot because the running backs you're going to wait for and get back when the draft order comes back to you are not as good. So get your McCaffreys, your Cooks, your Henrys, your Barkleys. That's how you start this strategy off. You need to ultimately be drafting one of those top 5 backs here if you have those top 3 picks. And then when it comes back to you here, we see that 7 out of 9 of the draft selections, I'll outline this for you here with my mouse, is that of these first 3 teams that we're taking a look at here, 7 of their 9 first 3-round picks were all at the running back position. Team 2 here is the outlier that went Kittle and Allen, which is a really nice team, I might add. So they've got virtually a 1 at every position. Keenan Allen's a wide receiver 1. George Kittle, obviously a top 3 tight end. Dalvin Cook, my favorite running back. So this played out very well for them. But teams 3 here and teams 1, they went with that running back overload strategy. In particular, my favorite of the bunch is actually how team 1 played out. You get yourself J.K. Dobbins, really high upside RB2. In my opinion, he could absolutely, and I would not be shocked one bit if he finished as a running back 1 this year. What does that mean? They just locked up a top 3 running back. I know he went first overall, but for the sake of this video, let's say that if he plays all 16 games, Christian McCaffrey probably finishing as a top 3 back. You get yourself a J.K. Dobbins. He could very easily be right in that discussion as well. So by going out here and drafting twice on that running back spot, you not only get yourself the guy that's a guarantee, assuming his health is good this season, to finish as a top-end running back performer, in addition to also locking up a player who has the potential to do that as well but isn't quite as much of a guarantee. And this is a back that I think a lot of other teams you'll see on the board are looking to as their running back 1. So you set yourself apart from the competition, giving yourself a huge advantage by taking a McCaffrey here. And then you come right back and take Najee Harris, who, again, I wouldn't be shocked at all if he's a top 12 running back performer and finished in that RB1 status. So immediately, this team has 3 studs at the running back position. Maybe these 2, since they're a little bit more risky, not purified running back 1s from day 1, take a little bit longer to get their legs underneath them, take some more additional time to get the train rolling here. But nonetheless, this team is set up incredibly for success. They are incredibly deep at the running back position. And if we take a look at CeeDee Lamb, Deontay Johnson, and Courtland Sutton, where they loaded up at receiver after this pick, that's nice as well. I think that CeeDee Lamb's got some crazy high upside this season. He played brilliantly as a rookie. And there's some target competition there, but the Cowboys, they air the ball out a ton. Deontay Johnson was one of the league leaders in targets last season. If he can clean his hands up a bit, he's a player that is a very, very good PPR monster if you're in that setting. And then if Courtland Sutton can rebound from that injury, that's a steal at the back end of the 6th round there. So really, really good value picked up here. Really nice upside and potential. This lineup, I would give an A+ right off the bat here. Cook, Kittle, Allen, DJ Moore, Cooper Kupp, Damian Harris. Something I'm not a bit fond of is how they waited all the way until the end of the 6th round to address that RB2 position. But the thing that you can take away from this is that this, again, is the outlier here. They didn't go with that running back overload strategy based off of ADP and how the board fell here. Really nice receiver core. It's not my favorite, but it's still pretty nice. Getting Kittle definitely helps things out a bit, but I would have loved to see them take advantage of another running back and filling that spot. I would have, honestly, J.K. Dobbins goes after Kittle here. I would have rather seen them go with J.K. Dobbins at this spot and have a Harris fall right here. Nonetheless, that's not how the board played out. And then team 3 here, lastly, they went with the overload again. Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 3 straight running back selections for him. I don't love CEH, but that's besides the point. You can pick the running back that you like best on the board at that spot. I think it's still a great setup here. Adam Thielen, he's a really nice wide receiver, and for a position that's so deep, it's okay if you're really strong at the running back spot to have 2 high upside wide receiver 2s in your lineup at those starting 2 wideout spots. Then they go Myles Gaskin again. There's that running back overload. You're just really grasping a hold of a positional strength by taking that many running backs that early. And then team 4 here. One quick note before we move on to our second strategy is that team 4 is find the value. My saying and my phrase, my buzzword, let's call it, my buzzword for team 4. Find the value. There will more likely than not, I'm going to say 1 out of every 2 of you who are watching this video right now will have a league mate that makes a pick in the top 3 that makes you scratch your head and you're wondering, why did you make that pick? It happens more often than you'd think. In some of my most competitive leagues, I've had some crazy risky picks go on in the top 3 of my draft board. In 2019, Melvin Gordon was in the middle of a holdout. He ultimately was not very productive that season for the Chargers. But because of how good he was in 2018, someone was so convinced that he was going to come back and be even better the next year. They were crazy high on Melvin Gordon. They picked him 3rd overall, and I forget who it was that fell to him, but it was crazy. And the team in that 4 spot was like, oh my goodness, I just had one of the best players that year fall into my lap. I'm struggling to remember exactly who it was, but regardless, someone of great potential fell right in their laps there. In this case, it's Saquon Barkley. Barkley, if you haven't checked out my video on Saquon and why he's a league winner this season, go check that out. I wouldn't say that there was too much of a boneheaded pick here made by the computer, but it's something that you should at least be prepared for because things could go a lot more your way than you expect. If someone reaches, maybe a wide receiver goes as high, maybe something else is picked here that is really astounding. Maybe you're a fan. Maybe this is just a scenario to throw out there, but maybe your league that you're drafting in, you guys are all from Ohio, and you've got some big Cleveland Browns fans, and someone picks Nick Chubb at the number 3 overall spot, and you're like, what are you doing, bro? Like, too high. Nick Chubb's awesome. He's a beast. Not the 3rd overall pick, though. And then someone like a Saquon Barkley, maybe it's even Dalvin Cook, falls into your lap at the number 4 spot, and you've just locked up a crazy good RB1 for your team in a spot that you probably wouldn't have otherwise expected that. So let's move on to that next strategy here. Remember, Strategy 1, if you're picking at the top of your board, running back overload. This is where you capitalize on that top end RB talent and set yourself above the rest of your league in that position group. Strategy number 2 here, picks 5 through 8 is what I've got listed up here, is best player available. This is one of the simplest and most straightforward strategies to make here. There isn't going to be a guarantee or a promise of who is going to be available for you to pick at this spot. You've got players picking ahead of you and picking behind you. And that's technically the case for all draft picks. But you have to wait for roughly 4 people, maybe more, to make that pick. If you're at the 5 spot, you've got 4 ahead of you. And then you've got, 7 behind you? So you've got players on both sides making multiple decisions potentially based off of what round it is before that draft selection ultimately comes back to you. So this is the most easily influenced position in the draft. So it's important that we don't reach and try and jump the value, try and get too fancy with this spot, because it could very easily bite you in the butt if you pick someone a bit too early and then someone you were hoping would fall down so that you could address a different spot on your board ends up going off the board because you have people on that snake who are picking twice before you get that next selection. So it's kind of nice where you're in the middle because you're going to get a lot of value that falls to you. Other people are going to be making reach selections and going out there and making some bold moves. This is the one where you just quietly stick to yourself. You probably have to be the most prepared for your drafts, to be honest, if you're in this spot. It's one of the tougher ones to go from because you're going to have to pivot a lot. And that's something I talk about a lot in my mock drafts, is that you got to be ready because in mock drafts, different players are going to be available to you every time, and it's really hard to know on draft day exactly who you can count on to be there at the spot. So if you remember back, we saw Saquon Barkley be the last running back taken, and so Team 5 is left with the choice of Alvin Kamara or Davante Adams. I think they correctly chose here and went with that top-end running back performer. We can expect some regression out of Alvin Kamara this season, but at the end of the day, I think it's more important that this team went out and addressed that running back position as opposed to taking even the best wide receiver available, because I think they are the best player available for their team at the spot, if that makes sense. So while Adams might be the best player available at his position, Kamara is the best player available in the sense of impact on their team and being aware of who is going to be accessible for you at that next draft position. Team 5 knows if they wait for running back at that 2.8 draft pick, the options are going to be far less than they are, say, if they were to pull the trigger right now on that running back. So if there was a situation, though, where it was Davante Adams versus Nick Chubb, I think then in that case you go Davante Adams because the drop-off is a little bit less significant. But nonetheless, again, this is something that you have to know for yourself. You can take my input, you can listen to my advice here, but at the end of the day, you got to make that fancy decision for yourself. Use me as a tool, use me as a resource, but no singular person is going to agree with every single ranking I have on my lists. So that's the part where you got to come in and take some level of responsibility for your own team's success. I picked 6 and 7. I like going Adams and Hill here. Maybe I would go Nick Chubb over Tyreek Hill personally, but again, that's your own individual and personal rankings. And then you see how they come back here in the second and third rounds, and they're picking a variety of different positions. So something I think that's really good to highlight here is Travis Kelsey going at the 2-5 with that Nick Chubb team. That is a great example of best player available. I think that that team recognized that, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, those are really, really good receivers, but there is no one else quite like Travis Kelsey, and the fact that he fell to the 2-5 is actually quite surprising as a player who I would take with the first pick in the second round if it was a half PPR or full PPR format. So again, taking that really, really nice upside. Tyreek Hill pairs DK Metcalf and Allen Robinson with their teams. That just became an elite wide receiver core. They went with the strategy I don't love so much. That's the RB0 tactic. I think that they're going to get burned a little bit with this Raheem Mostert, James Robinson pairing that we see down here as the running backs 1 and 2 for that team. But nonetheless, it's still something that the top of the board looks really nice for them. They went out and addressed Josh Allen and got that pretty good position as well. That's a top 3 quarterback play. Team 6 went Davante Adams, Antonio Gibson. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Gibson finishes an RB1 this season. That's a really nice board play right there. Just being able to, again, this is a computer making these choices, so they're really not going to have too many major blips and make too many major errors in who they draft. But just having that and then coming back and getting DeAndre Swift, it's a really nice balanced team. Again, it just kind of illustrates how where we wanted to go running back in particular and emphasize that position in strategy 1. The strategy 2 here, picks 5 through 8 again, best player available. Take the player that best suits your team based off of however that fell to you the first time around. So again, Kamara, you got that RB1. It's time to come out and get a receiver 1. Boom, Calvin Ridley. You got Devontae Adams. Now it's time to come out and address that running back position. Boom, Antonio Gibson. Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf. Again, not a team I love too much there with Team 7. Doesn't really follow the strategy, but I think this is something you should try and take advantage of. And then Team 8, I think, did it really well. Mike Evans, Robert Woods, that's a really nice top 2 receiver duo, along with the fact that you got yourself the tight end 1 and a very, very solid running back 1. So something important to note here for strategy 2, I would say you cannot leave the second round without at least one running back. That's where I don't like Team 7 so much. They didn't touch running backs until round 5, and that's something that people are going to do. People still like that RB0 strategy. I get it. I respect it. It's probably more viable in teams, in league sizes less than 12. So if you're playing 10 team, probably easier to capitalize on running back runs later. If you're in even an 8 or 6 team, then teams are just loaded and you can find players wherever you want. So if you want to stack a certain position group, you're still going to be fine later at running back. So it depends on league size. The larger the league, the less and less I tend to like RB0 strategies. The smaller and smaller the league gets, the more I can respect it. Still not something that I personally would rep here on the channel, not something I love too much. And I definitely would not live or die in a big money fantasy league with the RB0 strategy, but it's something that works for some people. Some people prefer it. That's fine. Let's move on to strategy 3 here and the final picks on the board. Picks 9 through 12. So this is what I like to call the balance spot. You basically have to be aware, and you're watching the board. You're watching everything that comes to you, and then you're watching the board leave you for a really long time, and then it comes back in that snake order. So you have to watch virtually every other player make a draft selection before it comes to you. You get 2 really quick picks, and then it's gone for a long time. So you got to know, who am I targeting as the board approaches you? You honestly, for your first pick, you've got to have 2 guys in mind. You have to have a solid idea of what you want to do at this draft spot. And again, make sure those picks are really balanced, because it's going to be a crazy long time before that board comes back to you after that first and second round selection. So the RB wide receiver balance here, what that means to me is you have to make sure you have addressed running back probably 2 out of 3 times in the top 3 rounds. That's the case for every single one of these teams except for Team 10 here that went and got, I would say, if you look at their first 4 rounds of selections, even in their first 6 rounds, they've got an elite wide receiver core and an elite running back, in my opinion. Cam Akers is a top 10 back. I think it's, unless something goes majorly wrong, we see a major injury, Cam Akers will be pulling that train for this team, so I think that's fine in this scenario, and I really, really like their top 4 wide receivers as well as that Lamar Jackson selection, so I can live with that team, honestly. If we go back to that, I think it was Team 7 that I didn't like so much in the strategy 2 that I laid out for you. Team 10, I would put above that team because I think they still went out there and got an RB1, which is really important. So the point behind getting a top-end running back and getting 2 of them, or these aren't top-end guys per se, but getting 2 of the top players left at this spot in your draft order, is that afterwards it gets really, really ugly and you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for starting level running backs at this spot. Team 9 gets Jonathan Taylor. That's a really, really strong RB1 pick there in the first round. It comes back to them, and Miles Sanders, who's got really, really nice upside, but a ton of risk and question marks around him, is the pick they make at the 3-9. So yes, you got A.J. Brown. That's a nice wide receiver. That's a potentially really high upside wide receiver 1, but that running back 2 isn't all that desirable. I don't particularly love Melvin Gordon either. That's probably someone you shop after a few weeks this season because I think he'll put up good numbers, but it's only a matter of time for me before Javonte Williams steps in, takes that role over. Team 10, I just talked about. Team 11 here, I do actually really like as having a really solid and sound wide or running back core. Aaron Jones, Ezekiel Elliott, they went out there. They found that balance. They got Chris Carson as well in the 3rd round, along with low-end wide receiver 1, Julio Jones, and high-end wide receiver 2, in my opinion, this season, Odell Beckham Jr. So they found a sweet spot. They've got also Chase Edmonds where they went out there and addressed that position to make sure they have enough bodies in case of injury, in case someone's a major bust. Aaron Jones, I think, is a crazy safe pick. Ezekiel Elliott, I think, is a crazy safe pick as well. I don't know how much their upside range is this season because of the fact that we've had some moving pieces. Zeke's been regressing every year since his rookie year, but he has added some receiving element to his game. Aaron Jones no longer has Jamal Williams in town. Team 11's a team I feel really good about, but maybe my favorite of the bunch, and there's one pick I really don't like on the board here, but that's Team 12. They got Austin Eckler and then perfectly executed that balance going by Stephon Diggs there as a 2-1. Stephon Diggs is a top 4 fantasy football wide receiver. He might even finish higher than that this season. Everything went well for him in 2020, but I don't think too much more is going to go terribly wrong for him this year. Allen and Diggs, it's a match made in heaven. The fact that they're getting a receiver at this spot on the draft, there's that balance. You got yourself a low-end RB1 in Austin Eckler, a PPR machine, and then you go out there and pair him with one of the highest upside receivers in the draft. That's great execution of the wide receiver running back balance. Then they come back, David Montgomery, a player who I think is really slept on right now. I think his ADP should be a bit higher than this. I wouldn't have an issue taking Montgomery over a Chris Carson, even over a Miles Sanders, because of how well and strong Montgomery finished out the season. McLaurin, a really good wide receiver too. I think he would be a borderline wide receiver 1, getting him in the top of the 4th round. Not in love with that Travis Etienne pick. Think there's a little bit too much value placed on him as a rookie here, and a player who his head coach has talked about as being the 3rd back in that rotation right now. So some question marks as to whether or not Travis Etienne is going to be a pure running back this year. But then that 3rd wide receiver being Tyler Lockett, again, a really good situation. So some of these, the ADP in the computer doesn't really show the strategies perfectly in some scenarios here. There's definitely situations where, I mean, obviously I said I wasn't picking, so the computer isn't going to execute my thought process here, but I'm trying to illustrate to you how I would attack this board. Again, I really like how Team 12 executed that balance. I think Team 11 had the right idea in mind here. I don't mind the Chris Carson pick so much, but if they wanted to take an Amari Cooper here, maybe I'd feel a bit better about that wide receiver core. That's okay, though. I still think that they're solid enough with these 2 names, but if you really wanted to make that a true balance, I think that going Cooper would have been the way to go there. And then, honestly, I would have liked it more if these 2 had flip picks, because then you could go Hopkins, Akers, Carson, Godwin, Ayuk, and I think that team would look a bit more balanced there, and you'd be feeling pretty good about that starting lineup. The teams on the back end of this draft are not necessarily going to have the highest upside because you're not getting the highest end talent and potential. I think the wide receiver cores tend to be a bit stronger with teams back here because, again, you're able to get a DeAndre Hopkins, a Stephon Diggs, and Amari Cooper and A.J. Brown on this back end curve if you play things out right. But I think that if you draft running back too much, like Team 11 per se, then you might end up looking at a Julio Jones and an Odell Beckham Jr., where you're looking to get some upside out of your wide receivers that maybe they don't give you a consistent high ceiling. So Julio Jones, he's going to have really nice games. Tennessee's not a high passing volume offense. They're not going to throw the ball all over the yard unless they're losing. They've got A.J. Brown too, so you're splitting between 2 wide receiver 1s in an offense that wants to throw a limited amount of times. He'll have really great weeks, but again, he's going to have some down weeks and some dips. OBJ hasn't been the same since he went to Cleveland. I don't think it's him. I think it's the system. I think he's still a great player. He's dealt with injuries, but again, the Browns want to run the ball first, and that's just the way things are. That's just their coaching concept, and that's the reality we live with as fantasy players. So those were some 3 strategies that I think are best suited to attack these 3 major clusters of draft picks. I guess if you want to throw out that number 4 position that I tossed in there as well as an additional strategy, that's something that you can do there as well. So 3 or 4 major fantasy strategies here for 12-team leagues to attack those draft boards. Let me know if you got any questions down in the comment section. Let me know what your favorite draft strategy was here. If you've got any comments, anything you'd like to add down there, I'll be sure to get back to you, answer any questions. I can talk some more about other sized leagues if that's something you want me to look out for in the future. So let me know. I'm here. I'm open to feedback and having a conversation with any of you guys. So thank you so much for watching today's video. I'll see you all next time. Peace.